Welcome to the October membership meeting of the Southeast Michigan Beekeepers Association. We're opening this month's meeting with the Boozy Bee Happy Hour.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to be making the classic Prohibition cocktail, the Bee's Knees. This was a drink everyone drank when they weren't supposed to be drinking. If you'd like to mix along, here are the ingredients and the equipment you will need. 2 ounces of high-quality gin or vodka, 3/4 ounce fresh squeezed lemon juice, 3/4 ounce honey syrup, which we'll get to in a moment. And for equipment, you'll need a citrus juicer, a fine strainer so that you don't get seeds in your drink, ice cubes, not crushed, a jigger for measuring, a cocktail shaker, and a martini or a coupe glass. While you get your things together, a little bit of history on the cocktail. Its invention is attributed to an American icon, the unsinkable Molly Brown. The rags to riches story of this headstrong socialite was so popular they made plays, films, even a Broadway musical about her life. Among her accomplishments, she survived the sinking of the Titanic. She ran for U.S. Senate 8 years before women even had the right to vote. And of course, she left us the Bee's Knees cocktails. So, back to mixing. Let's start by making the honey simple syrup, which is the signature of this cocktail. You'll need a Pyrex pitcher, half a cup of hot water, half a cup of honey, crystallized or liquid is fine, a sterilized stirrer, and a decanter. Remember to chill the syrup in the refrigerator before you use it, or it will melt the ice in your drink and water it down, and it will stay fresh for over a week in the refrigerator if it's in an airtight container.
How to make honey syrup. Heat half a cup of water almost to boiling. Pour into a glass jar containing half a cup of honey or maybe a bit more. The honey can be liquid or crystallized. Shake the covered container until the mixture is completely emulsified. Your honey syrup will need to be cooled down before using in your cocktail so it doesn't melt the ice and water down your drink. Your freshly made honey syrup can be stored in an airtight container in your refrigerator for up to 1 week and is a wonderful addition to many recipes. Add to olive oil with a squeeze of lime for a sweet, zesty vinaigrette.
Honey syrup is a great alternative to the simple syrup most bartenders use, which is sugar-based, because it can stand up against the strong flavors of citrus-based cocktails and, more importantly, bad booze. In fact, they say honey syrup may have first been used with this cocktail to mask the acrid taste of the drink's Prohibition bathtub gin. Speaking of toxic, a note to beekeepers on heating sugars.
All sugars, i.e. honey, granulated sugars, and high fructose corn syrup, when heated have the potential to create a compound called hydroxymethylfurfural, also known as HMF. HMF can form in sugar-containing food, particularly as a result of heating or cooking. Its formation has been the topic of significant study, as HMF is regarded as being potentially carcinogenic in humans. More importantly, when making sugar syrup to feed bees, overheating the syrup can form hydroxymethylfurfural, which is absolutely toxic to bees. Syrup should be almost clear, with no tinge of brown or indications of being burnt.
Okay, let's get mixing. So you've got your ingredients and you've got your equipment set up. You have your glasses that have been in the freezer. You have the citrus juicer with hopefully lemons that have been sitting out at room temperature, much easier to juice. You have your booze of choice, your honey syrup, which you made earlier and is nice and chilled, and of course, your shaker and ice. So let's go. First, you want 2 ounces of the booze of your choice. I'm doubling this so the cameraman gets a break. My shaker has a measurer on the inside. Otherwise, choose the 1 ounce or the 2 ounce, however you like to measure. You need 3/4 ounce of your chilled honey syrup. Actually, I can use this. And strained lemon juice. Again, I'm so bad. I'm not used to measuring. 3/4 ounce of it. Add your shaker with ice, cubes, not crushed. And give it a good shake. Doesn't take long to mix because it's only 3 ingredients. And decant into your cocktail glass of choice. It should be a nice, frothy, light, lemony cocktail with a great deal of fragrance, which we will enhance with the lemon twist. Just twist it over the top. See all those oils that make the fragrance incredibly delightful.
Yum.
Cheers. Onward with the cocktail. Make sure your glasses are in the freezer. And again, here are your ingredients and the equipment you will need. 2 ounces high quality gin or vodka. 3/4 ounce fresh squeezed lemon juice. If your lemons are at room temperature, they're easier to juice. And a twist for garnish. And 3/4 ounce honey syrup. For equipment, you need your citrus juicer, your fine strainer, ice cubes, a jigger for measuring, a cocktail shaker, and a martini or a coupe glass. Okay, garnish with that twist so the oils enhance the fragrance of the drink. And enjoy. Bee's Knees cocktails are a great way to showcase your honey for guests. On a last side note, if you're wondering why shaken and not stirred, the Bee's Knees mixes alcoholic and non-alcoholic ingredients, and a shaker can cool and blend these ingredients much more efficiently than stirring. Shaking does add air bubbles and water, so the drink has that frothy chiffon appearance. So, when mixing alcohol-only ingredients, as in a martini, you'll want to stir them so they pour crystal clear and you avoid those little ice sheets floating on the surface of your drink. Sorry, Bond. Enjoy, everyone.
The floor is all yours, Camilla.
Thank you. I'm checking to make sure I can actually, I still can't share, but is this going to change? Let's see. It did change. Ta-da. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I am one of the SEMBA's directors, and what we've been trying to work on and get better at is community outreach. And when we say community outreach, we mean getting to educate people that are not taking beekeeping classes, but they are interested in honeybees, beekeeping, pollinators, anything that has to do with what we love. And there are 2 things that we focus on, and we want to share this with you being members because you can help us both ways. And if this is something you're interested in, it would be amazing to have your participation. So one of them is that we get asked very often by various like institutions to come over and provide a beekeeping presentation. So for example, we have garden clubs, we have schools, we have like community clubs in cities. There's schools. Oh, I said schools, but we get asked to come over do a presentation. And the thing that happens is that sometimes we have to turn it down because we don't have a speaker that can go there. We cannot do them all the time. And we feel like if we could get a roster, like people that are willing or want to or are interested into being speakers, we could then combine the requesters with the speakers and get the word out there even more broadly. So in the website, we have 2 things. Number one, this is a public page. If you guys go to SEMBA website about contact us, this is for anyone here in Michigan or Southeastern Michigan that would like to request a beekeeper speaker. So if I run a little gardening club and I want somebody to come over to speak, they are going to provide their information here, what they're looking for, and we will receive that information. Now, once we get to this info, we're going to put them on hold and say, all right, I need to find a speaker that is available to do that talk. So how do we find those people? This fire, for example, this summertime, I did it myself. I did it 3 times. I did a garden club, I did Cub Scouts, and I did summer camp. And but again, like I actually got paid for some of these. Some of them were on a volunteer basis, but we had more requests. We just couldn't find beekeeper speakers in time. So let's suppose you are interested in being a speaker for these requesters that are asking for our help. Now, if you log into the SEMBA, this is not a public page, this is a private page. So you have to be a SEMBA member and you have to be logged into the website. And then you go on to members only and member speakers. Now, in here, you can sign up and you can tell us, like, where do you live? Where are you willing to go to? If you want to do it online only, or if you would be happy to be in person, if you, the times of the dates that you could do that. If you can only do paid engagements or if you're willing to do volunteer engagements, just let us know what is your style. And that way we're going to be combining those two. Whenever we come in, we get a requester, we're going to match it with a speaker, and we're going to get in touch with you, obviously privately, directly, and see if things work out. So yeah, this is what I just wanted to bring attention to, and I hope we get more engagement out there. That is all. If anybody has questions, feel free to post on the chat, and then we can let Michael start.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Camilla. She does a great job, by the way. And you'd be surprised how fun it is to actually give talks to people about bees. You get to be the most interesting person in the room. So it's a lot of fun. I highly suggest sharing your knowledge, because when you share your knowledge, not only, especially when you're sharing it with young people, you're not only helping to create new beekeepers, which is really important, but you're reinforcing the knowledge that you have. Anytime you're teaching someone, you're also reinforcing your own knowledge. So I highly recommend it. It's really quite rewarding. And with that, let's get Mr. Sautter.
Do you see that?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
We're good? Great.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you. Great job, you guys, on the drinks, and Camilla on the outreach. It's really important that we do share our knowledge about this. You'll find that you're going to be a speaker even at weddings and gatherings, because everybody wants to know about the bees. And so practice up with those kind of people, and then come out and help at schools and other venues like that. Yeah, it's an awesome way to get to know people. And like Richard said, it's a great way to get people learning about the environment, learning about bees and the importance of it. So cool stuff. So my presentation tonight is about treating, feeding, and winterizing. Some of it's going to be a little late, but this is a good, these are some of the questions I get all the time, especially this time of year and earlier, is how do I treat? What do I treat with? How do I feed? What do I feed with? And winter, what's your winter configuration? And how do you go about that? So I'm hoping to answer a lot of these questions in the way I do it. Again, when I say the way I do it, doesn't mean it's the right way. It's just the way that I've been doing. The last couple of years, I've had really, really good success, almost 100%. I've had over 100 colonies. So it's a really good thing. One of the things I'm going to talk about tonight is about ventilation versus insulation. And it's kind of new, but it's kind of old, but it's a lot different, and it's going to maybe get you at least at most to think about it. So let's get started. Ready? So we're talking about, ooh, a little spin there, treating. Some of the three things that are typically that we treat with and that are kind of common is the apivar with formic acid and the oxalic acid. Those are the three things that you hear about the most. And so we're going to kind of concentrate on those. We'll talk about a couple other ones, and there are many more out there, but these are the three most common that we use these days right now. And so we're going to get into that. Well, I don't know, like all that spinning, but some of the things so these are some of the things that we use. It's oxalic acid, powdered sugar. That used to be something that we used to do a few years ago. It kind of grabbed a foothold that a lot of people were doing it. It's kind of not used that much anymore. The data's not there. There's amitraz, there's thymol, like Apigard. There's hops from Hopguard and formic acid, which is the Mitaway quick strips. These are the most common ones that we use. And like oxalic, it's 1 to 3 weeks treatment during a broodless time. The biggest deal with oxalic is that it's temperature based. It has to be during, it has a certain temperature range that you have to keep it at, and we're from 50 to 85 degrees. And you have to also have a broodless time. Powdered sugar was when they used to just throw a few cups of powdered sugar right over the top of the beehives. And the theory was that the bees would groom themselves and then to get rid of the mites that are on the body, the phoretic mites. So they would use those powdered sugar, usually use a screen bottom board, and the sugar falls out, and also the mites would fall out. And you would do this 1 time a week for 3 weeks or during a broodless period. And again, it's fallen out of favor. I don't think it's as effective as some of the other treatments, and I'm not sure if I know if anybody uses it anymore. Apivar it's like a hard chemical treatment. It has amitraz is the main chemical. It's almost like an insecticide. It was developed like in I think it was 69 when they came out with that pesticide. They used it in beekeeping. It's a 45-day treatment, and there's no temperature restrictions. It's a really good tool to use in your toolbox. There is starting to become some bees that are or some mites that are not being affected by it, that are starting to show some resistance to it now. So it is, like any chemical, you just don't want to overuse it. So follow the directions, and it was with all these that you're using, that you really want to rotate them. You don't want to use one certain miticide or mite treatment. You really want to rotate them either through the year or every other year, and just try doing different ones, because you just want to keep the mites off guard. So again, I said thymol, it's an Apigard. It's a thymol based. You do it like 2 times, like 2 weeks apart. It's a good thing to use in the fall. You have to be careful of the temperatures being too strong, because your bees will abscond. So again, it is temperature sensitive. HopGuard they've gone through like 3 different ones now. I think it's up to HopGuard 3. It's made out of hops. It's 10 to 14 days, and you can use it up to 3 times. It doesn't seem like it's temperature dependent. It's not done that well lately, or it hasn't really grabbed foothold. I don't use it, but I have heard of people that use them in small colonies and have found them to be effective. So it might be something you might want to try with nukes. You might want to give that a try. And then finally, there's formic acid, and this is the MiteAway Quick. It's in the form of MiteAway Quick Strips or MiteAway Quick Pro. It's a 7-day treatment. You can use 1 strip, and then the second week do another strip, but it is temperature sensitive. So right now we're kind of falling below that temperature range in night, so it might not be as effective if you were going to use that now. It's starting to get cold, and I'm thinking that right now would be probably the last few days you could use this if you were going to use it. Hopefully you're already done with your mite treatments. So speaking of treatment, when do we start to treat? This is again as a generality, but in our bee school, we have asked the students to read this article by Megan Melbreth called The Greatest Generation. It's about winter bees. It's on the sandhillsbees.com. If you can't find it, you can Google that. This will give you an idea of what it's about. And just to give you just a short version of it, what it means is that the bees that are born in August, September, and October, these are the bees that are going to live through the winter. These are the bees that are actually physiologically different. They've got higher fat bodies. So these are the bees that are going to be born, and these are the ones that are going to carry you through winter. And then I say right here, when to treat, the start of the new year. I feel that the beginning of the bee year of 2022 bee year starts in July. That's the year. Because why? Because these are the bees that are going to be born that year. So for me, we're already in the third month of the new year for 2022 because we're already in October. So that's a good way to think about it when you are deciding when to treat. Typically, I take my honey off in end of July, and then I treat a week or two later after I give the bees a chance to rest. And the goal is to try to get the colonies as mite-free as possible when they're producing these winter bees, because this is the time that if you have any problems, if you have any viruses, if anything's going wrong, these bees will be affected, and this is when you're going to lose your bees. And so I always say I like to treat at the end of September, and end of July, and I'll treat depending on what I use all through till October. But my goal is to get rid of the mite pressure as they're making these winter bees. These are the greatest generation, as Megan put. And then you want to treat anytime your mite threshold is above 3%. So that's when I treat. I also use oxalic acid that I like to use, as Cecilia mentioned as we were having the question and answers before this started. I like to do it in the fall. Usually, I like to pick days that mean something to me, like Thanksgiving is a good day. Usually I'm looking for about a 45, 50 degree day right around there. You want the cluster to be loose, and you either going to do a dribble or you're going to do the vaporization, like you see what I got on the left-hand side there. This is to get rid of the phoretic mites that are on the bees. That time of year, usually there's not much brood. So most of the mites are on the bees. That means that they're on their bodies. And this is when oxalic is the most effective. It's like a cleanup. I like to use it as my last chance. And you can also do it again, like in February, or if you want, you can check them and do it again in February. But you want the temperature to be about 40, 45, 50 degrees. And you can go ahead and hit them again. And this is a cleanup. This will really do a good job in getting rid of the mites that are on there. So after the Lions game, go on out there and kill some mites. So now we get into feeding. What to feed, when to feed, how to feed. We'll start off with what to feed. You can feed sugar syrup, fondant, bulk sugar, which is called the mountain camp method. This is a method that I think should be used for emergencies. As you can see there on the second frame there in the middle, you can put a sheet of paper over the bees and you can pour a 4-pound bag of sugar over the top. If you go into your hives in February, March, and you're seeing that they're really light, this might be a really good way to feed them. It's more like an emergency style feed. You can give pollen substitutes. I'm not a big fan of pollen substitutes, but I think we get a lot of pollen in this area of Southwest Michigan. Pollen is a good thing, though, if you're building up your colonies in the fall that you feel like they're not up to par or they're not producing brood, then you might want to put a pollen patty in there. But typically I don't. Typically we get a lot of good fall pollen, and the bees are going pretty good, and I wouldn't use it. This year, though, it's been a rough fall at least for my bees. And the brood rearing stopped in August and September a little bit, and then they seem to be picking it up as the pollen was coming in. But also you can add additives to your sugar water. Honeybee Healthy is a common one that people use. Again, I don't use them. They are super attractive to bees, and that sounds good, but it could cause some problems there. You can see on the right, I use bucket feeders with the little praying mantis on top of one of them, and I give you an idea of what the feed ratio is. So how do I feed? Like I said, I use bucket feeders now. And I mentioned it about there in the talk earlier, or as we were conversing earlier. I mentioned Keith Lazar. He made these buckets for me that they're nice because you can pull the plug on them and you can refill them. They're there on the left. You just turn it over. It's got a screen on them, and you can just pour it over the inner cover. If you can put a box over them to protect them as they're out in the open, that's good. But if you can't, I don't use a box. I just leave them on top of the hive but I drill a 2-inch hole into my hive so that they just, they'll drain it in, and then I put a plug when I'm done. You can use a hive top feeder, like the ones in the middle there. You can use a paint can where you can turn it over and use the same thing. You can buy them at Lowe's, empty paint can, not one that was used. It'd have to be a new paint can. You can buy them, and you can put your syrup in there and use a nail and put a few holes in there and then turn that upside down. You can use mason jars, and you can use frame feeders. These are internal feeders. These are feeders that go inside the hive. Some of them hold 1 gallon or 2 gallons, and those fit right into the hives. And you can open feed. And open feed means that you put it out in the buckets here and or in those totes, and you put hay in there. One caution, one thing I do not like using is the entrance feeders or any external feeders this time of year, because you can get into robbing, big time robbing. Here's an example of me doing bulk feeding. This is out in my yard a couple of years ago. I don't do it anymore, but this is how I used to feed my bees. These are 65-gallon barrels, and they were filled to the top. And I usually keep a lid over the top, and I just wanted to show you how fast they drain that. And as you can see, if you put a bunch of hay on top, they'll just sit on top of there, and they will go ahead and suck all that syrup down. And these 2 buckets, these 2 things, it probably took them about 6-7 days to empty these. So
Wow.
that shows you how many bees are in there. And you can see them down there. They're on, they're at the bottom, finishing it up. The problem with this kind of feeding is that you're feeding everybody. You're feeding all the wasp and the hornets in your neighborhood, plus you're feeding your neighbor's bees if there's anybody there. It's crazy looking, like you just saw, and they're kind of done, so it's not even that busy right now. They're kind of finished it off. So but it can be pretty crazy, and obviously if you don't have just a couple hives, you wouldn't want to do something like this. But just this to give you an example of what robbing is, and that's the biggest problem that you're going to have, that you could potentially have if you're not careful when you're feeding in the fall. You need to protect your feeders with empty boxes. Like I said, you can put a feeder on top and put an empty box. Don't use additives. Tape any cracks around your beehives to make sure that there's no way other bees can get in. Reduce the entrances so that the bees can defend themselves easily, and avoid spilling anything in August, September, October. If you could do that, you can cause some robbing issues. And as you can see on the right-hand side, they will go in and they will take everything that's in that hive, and they'll probably kill half the hive as they're going in, and they'll do it all within a couple of days. And they never stop. I mean, you can try to put water over them and sprinklers. Sometimes that'll hold them off. But once they start, it's really difficult to stop. So chances are you might not get into this kind of robbing behavior, but you just don't know what's in your neighborhood. All you need is one strong hive. If you have 2 or 3 hives and one of them stronger than the other, and you spill some feed, they might go in and steal from the next door neighbor. And just something you really want to stop. I don't know if that was a dog or what. So when to feed? Of course, whenever needed. But for me, when I feed, I typically feed right around late September. I start to watch the bees as they're coming in and going. You can start to see when they're not being more active. They're kind of flying all around you. They're everywhere. I like to feed right around then is when I start to really fill them in, and I backfill them. As you see these 3 hives here, they all have bucket feeders on top. Again, I have a 2-inch hole that goes all the way down to the bottom. And I like to feed a single deep like that, gets 4 gallons of 2-to-1 syrup. These are the ways, this is what I do. I let it I backfill them up with syrup at this time of year. As I reduce, I do a lot of single boxes. I winter a lot in single boxes. So I put a queen excluder over these hives, and when I take their honey off, they have nothing. They have maybe 1 or 2 frames of honey. That's it. So they need to be fed. And 4 gallons works really well for a single box. You can feed 1-to-1 if it's early in the, in September and all that, if you're getting them to, if you need them to build up brood or you need to finish some comb. But typically you want to switch over to 2-to-1 as we get closer to the winter or closer to the fall, later in the fall, so that these bees can store it. They'll store it easier than 1-to-1. 1-to-1, they have to reduce the moisture or the moisture content in there, and to get it down to 2-to-1. And it's just easier for the bees to handle at this time of year. All right, so we went in through wintering, we went in through treating, or we went in through feeding and treating. So now we're going to go into wintering. So before we get into winter, I want to just talk quickly about the winter cluster. This is the cluster this is what bees do when they get into about 50 degrees. This is where we start to understand what's going on inside that hive at this time. So if you look at the beehive on the left, you can see they're up in the bottom and the top. And if you look on the right, think of the winter cluster as like an egg. That's how they are. You have 3 levels inside that winter cluster. And the inside you have the core. That's the brood nest. That's the area where they keep it warmest. Typically they keep it in the 85, 80 degrees during the winter, and then they'll bump it up to 90, 95 when they start to lay eggs, which is in our area, it could be the 2nd week of February, somewhere in that area. But that's the core. That's the red area there. That's where the queen is, and that's where most of the bees that are active are there. And then you have the mantle, and those are the bees that are around in the yellow area. And their temperature is a little bit less, they keep it around 60 to 85. And in there you can see the red dots. Those are the heater bees. Those are the bees that are keeping the temperature warm. And they walk around and they go in between the core and the mantle. And then on the outside is the shell. That's the insulating part of the bees. Like when you look at this cluster here on the left, if you blew smoke into them, all the middle would move out of the way, but all the outer ones, they're almost in a state of what do you call it, like low metabolic rate. They're not moving. They're kind of like barely alive. Their job is to insulate the core. So they're not able to move. They're kind of just stuck there, and their job is to insulate. At this time, you can see though, when this brood nest is together like this, it creates a lot of moisture and a lot of CO2. And this is where we start to get into insulation and ventilation. So as you look at this egg, it's producing all of this warm air inside there. And of course, it's freezing outside. And as that air comes out, it turns into moisture, or it condenses. And it starts to seep out, as you can see, and it comes out and it starts to rise because it's convectional. The heat rises up, and then it goes up to the top of the hive. And if you don't have it insulated, it's going to hit the cold air, and then it's going to turn into water. And that water is going to, that vapor is going to turn into water, and it's going to drip back down on the bees. And for years and years, we thought that, the best, we have to ventilate. You have to ventilate to keep that water from dripping back down on the bees. But as we're finding out later, and there's been some research, and there's a guy that he's going to be at the, I think he's out of the East Coast. I have his name. I'll show you in a minute. But they look at a tree and see how that it's all insulated in a tree. Yet that water goes up into that. Once it hits that insulation, it'll spread out, and it will go along the sides of the hive and all around the top. But the bees need water, so they're able to access it really well. And also there's the CO2 that the bees are emitting, and as it's rising up, if you put ventilation in there, the theory is that you release all of that CO2, you release all of that water and all that latent heat. As a gas turns into a solid, it causes, you need heat, and then that is called latent heat, which is what the bees use. So it's an amazing way that the bees have evolved to keep themselves in a winter cluster. And so the natural way is to be in a tree. As you can see here on the left, if you look at a normal box, there is our box, and that's equivalent to 1 deep. And you look at the tree, that's the same amount of volume as in that deep. And you can see all the insulation by that tree, and then we're putting them in these little pine boxes. William Hesbeck is the guy I was talking about. He's the one that talks quite a bit about no ventilation. And so this is where we're at right now. So as you can look here on the side, and what he does is he covers all his hives, no ventilation, and he keeps insulated. He insulates the sides as well as the top, trying to simulate the tree on the left there. So the best way to control moisture is to insulate the top of the colony. How many times you beekeepers have seen this, where there's mold in your hive and there's the bees are dead, as you can see on the left, because the water hit the cold, the vapor hits the cold uninsulated top and drips back down on the bees. Well, the problem is it's not so much the ventilation, it's just there's not enough insulation. You have to insulate the top of the box. That's where the heat rises. If the air, so you're trying to simulate that tree with all that infinite insulation that a tree has. So what you can do is, what we do, or I do, is you can tilt your box forward and you put a foam, 1-inch foam insulation on the top of your hive. Incidentally, this is all I do for all my colonies. That's all they get. They get 1-inch insulation foam board on top. I've still not bought into the no ventilation. I've got a lot of them that are ventilated and some that are not ventilated. So again, like I said, when you start doing something, I do it little by little, and I want to just see what kind of data I get out of my beehives. But this makes sense to me. Insulate the top of the hive. So that means we talked before about insulated tops, and we talk about moisture boards on top. If you're going to put a moisture board on top of your bees, and then you're going to ventilate it on top, you're defeating all the purposes of because what's happening is that it's just your moisture board is going to get turned into an ice brick, and then it's eventually going to warm up and it's going to drip onto your bees. It's about the insulation. So here you got a guy that tried to insulate, try to mimic a tree. I don't recommend this, but this is what they're thinking, is to put this top bar hive into a tree. So what are the other ways that you can insulate your hive? You can buy polystyrene hives that are made out of foam or polystyrene that have an insulated value. And I do keep a few of these. If you look on the right lower part, there's a blue one there with a yellow lid. That's a polystyrene hive. These boxes come in, they're all insulated. They have really good R value. There's the 3 manufacturers on the left. They do a really good job. And typically these bees that come out of those boxes seem to be ahead of my other bees that come out of the wooden boxes, based on, I'm sure, because of the insulation. They're great boxes, but like everything else, you know, ants like them too. So they'll bury, or they'll start a colony inside of them sometimes. The hive tools are hard on them. So when you're trying to split these boxes off, they can bend them and mold them. But they hold up pretty good. I mean, that blue box there, that double blue with the yellow, is probably about 8 or 9 years old. And I like them, but I like the wooden ones either. And they're a little bit more expensive. All right. So now we decided that we are going to insulate. We're going to keep the top warm. We're either going to add ventilation or not ventilation, but I'm a proponent of not adding ventilation. So all I want you to do is insulate. It's kind of what I do. I tilt all my hives forward in case there is water on the top. It will run down and out the front of the hive. And also, if you get snow and ice and rain, you do not want it going into the hive. If that does that, then it'll defeat everything and your bees will die. So you need to reduce entrances. You need to add mouse guards. If you're a wine drinker, you can do like the guy over there on the right. There's all kinds of ways to reduce your entrance feeder or your entrances to your beehives. But the main thing is you just do not want mice getting in, and it doesn't matter. You can leave them open. You can just put a hardware cloth. There's not so much, it's not such a big deal to leave them open as much it is worrying about the top rather than the bottom. Remove the honey supers and any queen excluders. Do not leave your honey supers on your beehives with your queen excluders. As the bees move up, the queens will be stuck below, and there's no way that they can go down and keep her warm because they'll all move up. And so you do not want that to happen. You want to insulate the top with 1 inch of foam board. You can insulate the sides around it, or you can make it like a sleeve around there. And the last thing is, if you're using screen bottom boards, you'd want to close those. Okay. Again, you want to insulate the top. All you have to do is, you can see the inner cover right there. You put the 1 inch over the top. You put your telescoping cover over that, and you can put a brick on top, and you're done. That's the minimal. If I only had a few hives, I would insulate all around the sides, just like he's done there on the right. And you would just use a 1 inch sleeve all the way around, and you leave the bottom open so the bees can come in and out. Here he puts a little shim so that it's rest on top right above the entrance of the hive. And then on this one on the left, they use a wood spacer just in case the bees run out of food. You can put emergency food in there over the top of them if you needed to do that. So what do I do? So that's what I do. I also use these, if you can look on the right, these are these little, they're called coroplast boxes. We got them out of Canada. Some of the, Sandy and I were getting them out of Canada for members of SEMBA. You can get them in all kinds of configurations. You can get them in single deeps, 8 frames. You can get them in for mediums. You can get them, and all they are is a shell. They're not a bee cozy. They don't have any insulated value to them at all. But I like them because I keep my bees out in the open, and I just fold them. I throw them on top, and it keeps all the wind, rain, and it prolongs my hives a little bit longer just from the ravages of winter. And they do offer a little solar value. As you can see, they're painted black, but they're really nice. As you can see here, I got 3 nukes pushed up against each other. There's one facing the other way and 2 facing this way. And those I use, I put queen excluders in there, and then I put honey supers on top, and they will fill those honey supers. So they use that as a communal honey super, and I take those off. I put the 1 inch board on top, 1 inch foam board, and then I put my covers on top, and then I wrap them in these plastic polystyrene. Here's an example of all different types of hives. The one on the left, I believe, is a Lyson hive. It's polystyrene. Then here's the second one from the left is just a cheap board. It's got a screen bottom board. It's got no insulated value at all. And then there's the 6-frame nuke that I like a lot. I use them quite often, number 17. And then another, just an old junky 5-frame hive. And then there's some 2, the one in the red and the blue is another polystyrene hive that, again, it's got insulated value on it. It has quite a bit of insulation in it. And then a couple more. And then here's more that you can see, this gives you the whole example of all different hives. You've got a double with polystyrene. You got 2 from Better Bee on top of the single. And you got some more of the Paradise hives. And then a double with what I like, my coroplast. All of these bees lived. So going back to about winter configuration and feeding and insulating and not insulating, none of it will matter. I don't care what you use. If you don't get your bees mite free, as close to being mite free as possible during August, September, and October, because the bees, if you got healthy bees, they'll put up with a lot. You know, they'll make it besides, regardless of what you do to them, because it's so important that you get those bees, those winter bees, to come out in those 3 months is clean from viruses and mites as possible. If you do that, you've covered about 80% of the battle of wintering bees. So if you did it right, these are polystyrene hive. This is March. This is what my bees look like in March, just loaded with bees. They were bearding in March, all outside, because there were so many bees in there. So it's just so important that you think about the beginning of the year as being end of July, August, September, October. Those are the 3 crucial months in your the crucial months in your success in wintering bees. So that's about it. And thanks for my grandson here, my favorite bee. I hope that you guys, if you got any questions, I'd love to answer them. But again, it's a different way of thinking about it. It's pretty simple. And I hope that you have good success this winter.
Thank you, Mike. Mike absolutely does make it look simple, but he puts a lot of effort into his bees and a lot of love. I did hear someone start to ask a question, and we would like to open the floor up for questions. So please go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah, this is Matt. We're kind of new at this, but we keep reading and hearing on all these videos and so on that the average colony needs to have 100 pounds of honey on it in order to get through the winter. And you're recommending removing the honey supers at the beginning of winter. What do they live on if you take the honey away?
Well, remember, we're feeding them. We're feeding them 4 gallons of syrup, which is quite heavy. That's what I do.
But
Now,
do you do that all winter?
no,
You
it's a
feed all winter?
one-time shot. They get fed, and that's it. And typically they make it. I very rarely have to feed any bees in the spring. Like I hardly ever run out.
And really, the 100 pounds, I guess, to your point, Mike, the 100 pounds is in the brood chambers typically. Like, you shouldn't necessarily depend on the honey supers to feed the hive throughout the winter, right?
Right. Now again, I don't want to confuse you. I'm doing singles, but you can do doubles. If you're using a double deep, and you get that top deep hive, or if you're doing a double 8 frame, or you're doing 3 mediums, if those are full of honey and syrup, that should be enough to get you through winter. The test is always, you saw those little nuke boxes I showed you on that rack. There's not 100 pounds of honey in there. It's all relative to the size of the colony. I've had bees I've wintered over in winter in little mating nukes, like the size of oh gosh, I don't know, that like half the size of a nuke. It was a double, it's polystyrene. The colony's small, but it's perfect for the size of that box. And there's enough stores to keep that colony going. It's more difficult with the smaller colonies, there's no doubt. But if you've got a regular sized colony, you should always feed your bees, even if, at the end of the year, you should make sure that if there's not enough honey. I typically don't like a lot of honey in my hives for winter. I don't think they do as well. Here in Michigan, goldenrod is not a good honey for bees to winter on. So I've learned that over the years. And as I've gone the last few years, I've almost eliminated my dysentery, all my problems that I've had before, letting the bees naturally gather goldenrod asters and all that. It's just got a lot of high ash content in the honey, and the bees don't digest it as smoothly as they do sugar syrup.
Okay.
But the bottom line is you have to keep 100 pounds of honey is right. If you're using a double deep or, and even if you're filling a single, it's quite heavy. Remember that single deep, all that brood is hatched out, everything's gone, and you're pounding it in with syrup, and they store everything. And there, so what do you have? You got this colony that's surrounded by food, and there you got a small area to heat. And so it's perfect scenario. I've seen so many beekeepers, 4 or 5 supers of on top. That's, all that hot air is going up there. All that moisture is going up there. And the bees can't access it. And there's no insulation. You want that insulation right above that brood nest. A lot of times my bees you'll see, remember they used to say, if you see the bees at the top, that means they're almost out of food. Well, if you insulate the top, most of those bees will be at the top and they'll be surrounded by food. And man, they don't go through much food at all. It's crazy. I still don't understand how they, you go in March, February, and you lift a hive and it feels like it's just as heavy as it was when the fall. They always go through, but they really go through it in March. Once that brood starts and that queen starts laying eggs, boy, they go through it. And that's when the area is you really got to worry about food. Is usually typically for Southwest Michigan, it's March. You got to really watch out, make sure your bees have enough food to make it through these till the flowers start to bloom.
Mike, can you talk about uncapped nectar in the hives right now?
Yeah, uncapped nectar, I would leave it if it's in the brood chamber. If it's there, it's the same as 2 to 1. Probably they pulled most of the moisture out, but they haven't uncapped it. If you've got it in your supers, I would have to take them off. You can take them off and you could feed them back to the bees in the spring, or you can, have somebody that has a refractometer and test it for you. And if the moisture content is low enough, you could harvest that honey. Anything else? So one of the things we take away is, is that you make sure that you insulate your beehives, especially the top. So again, if you have, somebody was talking earlier about the pine chips and all of that, it's supposed, again, it'll suck the moisture up. But if you have ventilation above that, it's going to create a brick. And so to me, it's just better to insulate right over the top of the hive.
There is a question in chat. I don't know, Richard, do you want to read it for Michael?
Let me see. Well, okay, yes, thank you. Would adding 2 inches of insulation on top of the outer cover work like under the cover?
Well, again, it probably would, but it's better to put it under because you need to protect that insulation from sun, rain, snow. I would actually cut it to put it underneath the telescoping cover. It just protects it, then you could put a brick over that. But that insulation is pretty far up. Like I said, I'd like to get it right over the top of the cluster. I want that insulation right there.
And you're putting that on top of an inner cover, right?
An inner cover, or for me, Richard, I use those canvas cloth. So there is
right.
I just throw that cover right over that. But if you're using an inner cover, yes, put it right over the inner cover with the notch up, not down. So because the down would give you the ventilation, which you don't want. So
thank you.
Yeah. A couple of things that I always talk about with winter bees that I learned over the years is I had 2 incidences where somebody called me and said they had an open air hive underneath their mother's port, or underneath the house, not underneath the overhang of the house. So if you don't know what an open air hive, that's a hive that's out in the open. You can see the wax combs, you can see everything. And he called me like in September, October, and said, hey, can you come get these bees? And I said, man, if I get those bees, they'll never reorganize in time to live, and cut those out this late in the year. I said, call me in the spring if they come. And I had no idea that these bees would make it through the winter. And he called me in the spring. And so I said, wait a minute, all this worried about insulation, this, that, and that, and these bees lived out in the open. How did that happen? Now there must have been, you know, the overhang was big. So again, that was insulated. So that probably helped them. And obviously the wind didn't get to them. It's not the way you want to do bees, but it just gives you the idea of the resilience of the bees. They can make it through winter if they're healthy, and if they've got enough food stores, and if they're, you know, in a good environment. And so moisture is not your enemy. It is if you're not insulating and you're ventilating too much in the air, you know, or not ventilating at all. If you're not going to insulate, then absolutely ventilate. So I don't know if that makes sense. If you're not going to put insulation over the top, then make sure you ventilate, because you got to get that air, you got to get that moisture out of there.
So there's a series of questions in the chat, Mike, and I'll just go with them in the order that they are. And so Michelle Armstrong asks, what is the easiest way to connect foam board on the sides? Duct tape doesn't work in the cold. It sure doesn't.
No, you could use a ratchet strap. You could probably glue, or you can buy that foiled tape that they use in house construction. You could.
I use those tie straps because to her point, yeah, the glue gets rigid, and I only have 1 or 2 hives that I do that with as an experiment. But tie straps.
Yeah, you can tie them around, like I said, or you could build them, glue them, and this, you know, and then put foil wrap along the sides. And get that, and then make it into a box. And that, yeah, would work.
My my latest favorite is that the foil foam, the foil bubble wrap that you can buy in the insulation aisle.
Mm-hmm.
And I stick Velcro to it, so I wrap it around the hive, get the right dimension, and then I have like the right Velcro pieces lined up, so that way I just wrap it around, Velcro it on, and good to go.
Right.
And then at the end of the season, they just peel right off, and I roll it right back up and throw it in the garage.
Yeah.
There you
It's
go.
another option.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
I find that's the easiest for installation and storage, but everyone does, you know, their own thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Mike, when do you put the top insulation on?
You know, it's funny, Richard, you can leave that top insulation on all year long. I mean, it really does. It helps insulate against the heat too. So you can leave it on. The problem you always have with anytime you're using foam is ants. You know, the ants get in them, and but I would typically start putting them on, you know, probably in the next couple of weeks. You start getting them on. You want to get them on before it starts getting, you know, really, really cold. So I will start throwing boards. A lot of mine still have them on. If you're using cloth, it's great because the bees don't have access to it for an inner cover. But if you're using an inner cover, the bees will eat that foam insulation. They'll burrow. They don't actually eat it. They'll dig through it, and they'll make a hole in it. So you could put a piece of tape or something over the inner cover hole, so the bees can't access that insulation.
Okay, and Fred, you have a question here. I hear differing answers for the inner cover notch. Should the notch face up or should the notch face down? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to have ventilation, then you want that notch to be down, right? If you're trying to not have ventilation, you want that notch to be up.
Right. Another thing you have to think about, like up north, you know, up in the UP where they're getting, you know, 3-4 feet of snow, they might have to keep that. They might have to keep that notch down, so the bees will have a way to enter and exit. Sometimes that gets plugged up, and they'll need an upper entrance. So some people will do that. Again, they're heavily insulated. You are going to lose some. You're going to get some ventilation in there, but sometimes that happens. One of the other things that happened to me one time that told me about insulation was I had a bunch of nukes on a rack, and I had about 8 of them. This is about 10 or 12 years ago, and I was checking them in the spring, and there was a lot of snow on the ground, and I was going through one after another, and they were wet and dead, and another one was dead. And these are little 5-frame wooden box nukes, and dead. Almost the whole rack was dead. And then as I was walking behind it, I almost fell because there was a bunch of snow there, but one of my beehives fell off the rack and landed on the ground. I don't know what, maybe the wind knocked it over or whatever, but it was covered in snow. That was the only hive that lived. It was buried in snow, so it was insulated the whole time, and it was thriving. And the bees couldn't get out. It was just packed full of snow, and every other one was dead. So again, it's just an incident that made me think, man, wait a minute, how did that happen? Again, there's all kinds of different ways you can look at that, but I wouldn't want to bury my hives in snow all the time either. So.
No, you probably wouldn't, but it is a good point. Snow is a good insulator.
It is.
So, and I want to say it's Michael Bush who doesn't uses a top entrance exclusively
Right.
because of the amount of snow that they get where I think he's in one of the Dakotas. And because of the amount of snow that he gets, he only uses a top entrance, right? Because you don't want your bees to get trapped inside. So it was a bit of good fortune that they did all right despite not being able to get out. So I have a question here. So if you see your bees only using the upper entrance right now, what would you do?
I would probably cover it and get them used to going to that bottom entrance. I would get them to go down. They'll figure it out. And then again, remember, or you could wait until it gets cold and they stop using anything, and then you could cover that entrance, and then they'll figure out how to go down. Either way would work. You could wait until it got really cold. Like me, I have a lot of nukes that are standing alone, and I will move those once it finally gets really cold. I'll move them and put them all together to help each other for insulating. Like you saw in that one rack, I just moved them all together and use the sides as insulators for the other hive. So that's what I would do. I would probably wait till later, or I would do it now and get the bees accustomed to going down below.
I see Lori has her hand raised. Did you have a question, Lori? Thank you, Donna, for pointing that out. Lori?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me
Hey,
now?
we can hear
Yes.
you now.
I'm sorry. When you were talking, excuse me, when you were talking about the supers on top, which have some uncapped honey, and if there's a lot of it there, not in the brood chambers, but up above, then what do you do with it? You just, because I mean, for the winter time, you got to pull it off. So what do you do with the stuff then? Because it's not going to be good for them, is it?
No, like I said, I would probably take it off, and then I would test it and see what kind of moisture content it has. If it's low enough, you can harvest it. If it's not, you could give it back to the bees in the spring or somewhere, or put it back on the hives in the spring or the summer, and let them continue to fill it and do it, and they'll adjust the moisture to it. But if
So
you have,
in which case,
if you have a lot of supers, I wonder why they didn't uncap it. I'd be suspect. I mean, why they didn't cap it. You get a few frames here and there, but typically you don't have that many that are uncapped. But I would probably take it off.
what do you do with the frames then with them? If it's not gonna be good enough for eating, and you want to give it back to them in the spring, what do I just put them in? Put
Just
those in the plastic?
Throw them right on top again.
I mean, in the wintertime, what do I do with them?
Oh, I would store them in your house or in your garage or something. Make sure that no vermin or something can get in there. You can just
So they
keep
can be
it
left outside in a hive box as long as nothing can get inside of the box.
outside. What do you
Yeah,
mean?
like not in a house, not in a garage, but just outside in a hive box with a board over it and underneath it, so nothing can get in and out.
I'd be really leery about leaving honey outside without being protected. It would be I would not want to leave it out there. Mice and ants or somebody might get in there and destroy it. So I would probably put it in my garage or something.
Basement's okay too?
Yeah, basement's okay. Just making sure you would freeze it first before make sure there's no small hive beetle larva or wax moth larva in there. You'd want to freeze it first.
For a couple days?
Yep.
And then don't put any bags over it then, no plastic over it then.
No, I would not. No.
So I have some frames right now that have been sitting there. They had full honey, and is that going to be no good then for them to give them in the fall like this? This is from, it's honey from 2020 that I can't eat.
Does the bees have enough honey now? I mean, do they have enough stores now?
I hope so. I'm going to check after. I gave them less than 2 weeks ago. I gave them some formic acid, Formic Pro, so I can't check for another few more days to find out how much there is now of honey there.
Well, Formic Pro is a 7-day treatment, so after 7 days you can go in and check it. But you can always just lift the hive from the back. If you can't lift it, it's super heavy, then they've got enough. But if it's not, then yeah, I would probably give them that and give them 2-to-1 sugar syrup to make sure that they've got enough stores for the winter.
Oh, so it's okay to give them those frames that's been sitting there for months and months that are in the
Yeah,
plastic bags?
if they don't have anything, yeah. But again,
Okay.
you don't want to add too many stores. I mean, too many stories to that hive. You want to keep it, you know, I don't know how many boxes you have, but you don't. If you got 3 boxes, you don't want to give 5 or 6 boxes because that's a lot.
Okay.
Take
Yeah,
care of.
I'm going to stick with 3 then. Yeah, because they're medium supers and boxes. They're not deeps.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Mike, I actually have a question. It's not precisely related to wintering, but I was wondering what weight of canvas you're using for your covers on your hives.
I think it's called number 8.
Number
It's number 8. You can buy it at what's the name of it? Duck something. You can do a Google search, duck canvas, and it'll come up. And actually, when you look on the website, it will say beekeeper canvas.
Okay.
And I know it's number 8. I believe it's number 8. Yeah.
I have that available. This is Keith. It's
Oh.
available, so if people wish it, it's already cut and ready to go.
Well, there's your answer.
Well, there you go. There
Yeah.
you go.
And that's the right number.
It is number 8. Yeah.
Yep,
Yes.
number 8. Exactly.
8.
Duck cloth.
Yep.
It's really nice to just put it on. The bees propolize it, and it lasts a few years, and then eventually they start putting holes in it. But then it's great for swarm traps, and it's great for you can use it on top of your swarm trap. You can cut them in pieces, and you can use them on nukes and cut them in half. And it's puts up a. What's really nice is they put a really nice propolis barrier on top of it, and that there's a lot of talk about the propolis envelope. Meaning that the bees surround themselves in propolis, and that canvas helps.
And those canvas are so wonderful when you're working the hives so that you can close over like the first 5 of the 10 frames that you're working. I would highly recommend buying some.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions? Anyone? Let me just double check the chat here. Yay, Michelle. Well, if there's no additional questions, I do want to encourage everyone. It is in the newsletter, but MBA, the Michigan Beekeepers Association, is having their conference Friday and Saturday, the 22nd and 23rd, next Friday and Saturday. So check out in the newsletter, go to the MBA site. They're a wonderful organization that we support as well. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. I'll throw it out there one more time. Are there any other questions? Any additional questions?
One thing, Richard, I wanted to say is that Bill Hesbeck, the one I was the author of some of the ventilation and insulation, he wrote an article in the ABJ that was in that presentation. I think he's going to be speaking for the MBA upcoming MBA conference.
Okay, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. That ought to be a good talk. There's always a lot of really good talks at MBA. So I highly encourage if you're a new beekeeper or an old beekeeper, we can always learn new things and reinforce things that we already know. So do attend MBA. It's worthwhile.
Absolutely.
So MBA has an amazing international lineup, but Mike, local, you are the best. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. I learned from everybody else. I mean, there's no way of just, I don't formulate all this myself. I grab your own. What the key to good beekeeping in your local area is to talk to people that are in your area and see what success they have and how they do it. That, to me, you can stay off YouTube, you can stay off all those other things. Remember, those people are talking about their specific area. And if your area, if you know beekeepers that are successful, by all means, talk to them, and learn from them. And that's probably the best way you're going to go about it.
All right, I'll be heading out to buy some foam insulation myself this year. Maybe not right now, but this week to get ready for that. I'm going to give that a go. I know a couple other people who have had good success with it. So, if you want to be successful, model yourself after success, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, 2 years of almost 100% survival over 100 hives. It's hard to beat. Again, though, I stress, it doesn't matter what you use if you don't have healthy bees. If they're not pretty much mite-free or virus-free going into September, October. Do not start treating in October. It's almost a done deal. You're not going to.
You missed the train.
Yeah. Start early and get it cleaned up, and man, they're forgiving. If you don't, bees are pretty forgiving if they're healthy.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I don't know if you didn't see it. Keith Lazar, who's one of our favorite vendors. We love Keith. He posted his number in the chat. Great local source for equipment. And as you probably all know, what really kills us on our equipment is shipping. And Keith is local, so I do suggest that you give him a call. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and read his number in case you can't find it in the chat. Keith's number is 248-361-1710. And there was a question, Keith, do you have a website or anything where people can look at what you have to offer?
No, I don't presently. What I do is once they contact me, then I'll send them my flyer on a file, and we can go from there.
All right. Again, I highly encourage, Keith's a local beekeeper, a local supplier. Save on that shipping, and give them a call. And with that, I'll go ahead and call this meeting to a close. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Before we leave, there is one question. Is it possible to feed too much? I think the quick answer is no, because they'll stop eating what they don't need. So the goal is 4 gallons, but really they'll stop when they're done.
That's a great question and great answer, Michelle. Yeah, feed them until they stop or until they're super heavy, but they will quit.
Yeah.
Unlike me.
Mike, I have a question. I have one of the mentees has 4 mediums filled with bees. 4 medium boxes still filled with bees. They're just go-getter bees. It's filled with bees. She can't collapse it anymore.
There's nothing wrong with that, I don't think.
Yeah, throw an insulated board on top.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I thought you only you try to get them down to like 3 at the most, but that's so many bees.
No.
You can, as long as that honey's on top, and all their stores are on top, and that insulation's above them, they'll be okay. You try to get them in the 4 boxes, mediums, isn't that? Is those 8 frames or 10 frames?
8 frames.
Yeah, that's fine. That's perfect.
All righty. Thanks.
All right, I should have such problems.
All right. Are there any more questions? I think if not, I will conclude this meeting and stop the recording.